The current strike among Hollywood actors and writers could be just another layer that adds to a struggling and changing media industry. At least that's according to CNBC framing. This is top of investors' minds as earnings seasons tee off this week, starting with Netflix tomorrow. According to analyst Michael Nathanson, the ad-supported option for Netflix and Disney Plus could be one of the few areas that saw growth and concentration this quarter. Disney CEO Bob Iger recently extended his contract with the company through 2026 due to challenges he wants to address, including the role of Disney TV networks at the company. He said, quote, "They may not be core to Disney."
According to Moody's debt analysis Neil Begley, an agreement increasing compensation under new collective bargaining agreements will ultimately cost Moody's rated companies an additional $450 million to $600 million a year for each year of a new 3-year contract for all 3 guilds, DGA, WGA, and CNBC reports that the top Hollywood executive, Warner Brothers Discovery CEO David Zaslav, made $498 million the last 5 years, 384 times as much as the average writer. Joining us now to weigh in on what's going on in the media world is TV producer and writer Blake Masters. Thanks for joining us, Blake.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
So, what is the current state of the standstill? Is it really the case that we're potentially going to see a strike of both actors and writers for months yet to come?
Yeah, it looks this way. The AMPTP is making no effort to come back to the table to even engage in negotiations. And I think this goes to a whole bunch of systemic issues that go beyond the entertainment industry in terms of modern business practice and things like that. But it also comes to a fundamental shift in the nature of the entertainment business. I was part of the last strike in 07-08, and that was a fight about money between two people who were in the same business. What's changed is I don't think that the companies and the actors and the writers are actually in the same business anymore. They don't have the same goals and they aren't incentivized in the same ways. And so as a result, until there's a way to bridge that, the strike's going to just keep going.
Blake, can you unpack that a little bit more? Because when Robbie and I were talking about this yesterday, we had some confusion as to why things have changed so differently, why it is that so many artists are talking about residuals and how they're getting so much of a smaller piece of the pie than it seems they did in years past. And that has something to do with how contracts are structured and the fees are doled out. What's so different about how movies and TV shows make money today as compared to how they did back in 2007 during the last strike?
Okay, there's a whole bunch of issues you got in there. The simplest way to start with is to talk about, from the company's point of view, the business they want to be in. Back in 07-08, when a company made money, they did it by maximizing the number of eyeballs that were on every specific piece of content. The ratings on your TV show, the box office on your movie, the DVD sales. So the goal was to make the great content that would attract the most possible eyeballs to each individual piece. The companies now actually want to be utilities, where you don't care what the quality is of the power running through the lines as long as the light switch works. They want a content slurry, and there they just want content that's good enough. And so their goal is not to make great content anymore. It's to make good enough content to keep your subscription up. And as a result, you've got the writers and the actors still trying to make great content because that's the only way we make money. We still get hired by each individual piece, and the companies are basically pushing us down because they don't actually care about great content because they don't want to be in the content business. They want to be in the delivery business. Now, the ways they're doing this is they're using the idea of the breakup of the classic 22-episode television season that used to dominate everything. The way actors and writers are paid was based on a system that arose in the 1950s and 60s for how many episodes a show would make, and that's the amount of payments you would get. Now, with the rise of streaming, network television, which used to be this dominant force within the industry, lost all its power. And so there were these margins that companies could play with. Instead of making 22 episodes over 12 months, they could make 10 episodes, 8 episodes over 12 months. You've just paid half as much money, but you keep the writers on that show for 12 months. In fact, they would have decided they could, instead of having a show on the air once a year, they would have them on the air every 14 months. And all of a sudden, you've cut writers' pay. So there's a number of systemic issues around these for the ways in which they have found using the marginal areas of standard business practice to reduce payment to writers for the same labor over more time.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like a lot of price confusion, frankly, because you can't tell, how many people. It's hard to perceive how many people are subscribing or continuing to subscribe to a Netflix, a Hulu, a Disney Plus, et cetera, because of this specific product that these specific people worked on. So from the writers, actors' perspective,
Well,
et cetera.
let's stop there.
Okay,
there. These
sure.
are companies that can pinpoint exactly when you pause, exactly when you turn it on, exactly when you turn it off. They have all the data. They know who watches what, where, when, why, how long. They know what patterns make them more viewers. They have all the data. The issue is because they are vertical monopolies who are not monetizing individual shows, but the whole slurry, they are not sharing any of that data. They consider it proprietary. And so they know the answers. They are just unwilling to share the answers. So just to start from there, they know the answers.
I would push back on a claim, which maybe I don't know that you're making, but that the content has gotten sort of appreciably worse over time as a result of this structure. There's certainly more TV shows, movies, et cetera, that I enjoy now. I mean, effects have gotten so much better. Storytelling stretching over long periods of time. Like the 22 episode arcs of television shows often had a lot of filler content that was skippable or familiar or doing same tropes of storytelling. Do you think the content is really suffering as a result of this system?
Here's what I'll say. What you're talking about is the era of peak TV, which died about 8 years ago. The thing about Hollywood is it's a brand new business every 10 to 12 years. It never stays the same. So what you're talking about is a version of television when streaming was new and there was all of this discovery of all the possibilities of the platform. And that, yes, there was great content, and there's still great content, but the issue is that the companies actually are not prioritizing great content. What they want is they want to de-risk content. They want to put on content that is derivative because it is, in their eyes, less risky. And the lesson they are failing to learn is that Hollywood, basically you produce the same thing for enough time, the audience gets bored and stops showing up. That's why you're seeing erosion in Marvel movies. That's why you're seeing erosion in long-held franchises. This is the same thing that happened to action movies in the 90s and cowboy movies in the 70s and the giant studio system in the 30s and 40s. This business always changes. And if you think you can de-risk the creation of content, you are basically not paying attention to history. So one of the things they are doing is they're also basically putting that risk more on the backs of writers, forcing us to go through more hoops before they actually pay $1. And so this de-riskification is one of the major financial issues. And where it's leading to in quality of content is if you don't care if it's great, if you only want it to be good enough, you will not pay the money for the extra writers. You will, in fact, make the showrunner have to rewrite all of everything over production, which leads to less quality. You have an overworked people, and you have people who aren't gaining skills. And so as a result, you are going to end up with, in the long run, content that is produced by exhausted, tired people who, of course, aren't producing at their peak level. And that's why the content is creating a problem. And you're seeing it in box office. People are getting tired of the same formula. And because you cannot de-risk the production of content.
So I've heard writers in particular talk about how changes to how writing rooms are staffed has affected writers' pay. And it seems like maybe you're alluding to that a little bit as well. Could you explain what's going on there to us?
Sure. The traditional pattern of a writer's room was a studio would greenlight a show, meaning we are making a season of the show. The showrunner would then hire whatever suitable number of writers they felt was appropriate. On a network show where you had very little lead time, they'd hire more writers because there were more episodes and less lead time. On a cable show, you'd often hire less writers because you had more lead time and fewer episodes. I did a show back in 2005 where it was myself, another executive producer, and a co-EP, and we were the entire staff with 3 people. But we had 16 weeks to write before we went into production. And once we went into production, all 3 of us were still on staff, still being paid, and so we could each oversee the scripts we wrote. What happens now is they don't greenlight the room. They don't say you're making the show. They say we're going to put together a writer's room. And so instead of paying you producing fees, your guaranteed fees, what we're going to do is pay you a weekly pay, which is far below what you would be paying on a weekly basis if we activated your producer fees. We'll keep you in that room for 10 weeks, extract all your labor at below market values, and then we're going to let everybody go, all the other writers except the showrunner. So there's only one writer left. So instead of 3 writers, each of whom has the time and energy to devote to their own thing, who are getting paid their producing fees for all episodes produced, one writer is getting all episodes produced, having to produce more than humanly possible amounts of labor, and all the other writers basically work under market for 10 weeks and then get laid off. They are essentially extracting the labor without paying for the labor, because the way writers get paid is based on essentially a system that was developed when the business was different. And this is one of the things that when this strike is over and an agreement is achieved, I think the writers, as writers, need to look forward and really examine how we get paid, how our contracts are structured, and redo them for, truthfully, the modern reality. So there are 2 layers to what's going on with writers. We have to put in a floor with this strike to make sure we aren't abused and our rates aren't suppressed further.
Sure.
But when it's over, we have to look at our overscale pay, our back-end pay, our long-term things, and figure out how to structure our payment so that there aren't these margins that can be abused by the companies in their, quest to drive down labor costs while, putting all the money in the pockets of a very small coterie of CEOs and boards of directors.
Blake Masters, thank you so much for joining us to discuss this. We really appreciate it.
Thank you very much for having me.